I was born in California, but I call Iowa my home. When I was 10, Mom and Dad moved us to the family farm in northeast Iowa. As a city boy growing up in rural Iowa, I had many unforgettable experiences. My somewhat plausible stories of life in the Iowa countryside have a tinge of truth and a whole lot of wild imagination. I hope you like this short tale about the killer corn. One day during the heat of summer, my brother suggested we play tag in the cornfield. The first thing I noticed when we got to the field was the whispering. "What's that?" I asked my brother. "It sounds like someone is out there." My brother could have suggested it was the voices of the dead Indian warriors, but instead he said it was the corn growing. "We can actually hear corn growing?" I asked. Actually, what we heard was the wind blowing through the corn stalks, causing the edges of the leaves to scrape against each other. The edges of the corn stalk leaves were sharp, rough, and serrated. I soon learned that the leaves were sharp enough to cut deeply into my arm. We ran through the cornfield chasing each other as we played tag. But it was not long before one of the large green corn plant leaves cut deep into my tender arm. "Ow!" was all I could say as I looked down at the now bleeding wound. "What's up, Wimpy?" asked my brother. After Mom treated my wound with the painful red mercurochrome, which dripped, making the injury look like it was still bleeding, she had to cover the long injury with 3 Band-Aids. In those days, bandages came in slightly transparent paper wrapper with a thin red string sticking out of one end. If the string was pulled correctly, it would effectively cut through the paper, revealing the Band-Aid. I could never manage the technique of opening it. I always seemed to pull it out of the end and end up holding a string dangling from my finger. The Band-Aid was simply a pink tape with a small square of cloth attached to it. The blood would saturate the cloth and then dry into a scab. Eventually, the stickiness of the tape would give way and the Band-Aid would be held in place by just the scab alone. My older brother loved sneaking up and grabbing one of those loose ends and yanking off the Band-Aid. This would rip the scab off and result in bleeding. Once again, Mom would treat this wound with mercurochrome before attaching a new Band-Aid. We forget about the great advances in technology that occurred in the 1960s. The greatest of the advances was the invention of the ouchless Band-Aid. The cloth part of the bandage was covered with a very thin perforated film that reduced the chance of the scab sticking to it. Unfortunately, this advancement came with the increased price of the product, so Mom rarely bought them. I sat down on the porch after being treated for cut by sharp leaves. My brother sat down beside me on the porch. "Boy, oh boy, you were so lucky," he said in his typical schmarmy voice. "Don't you know you should never run through a cornfield?" I shook my head. "That cut could have been a whole lot worse." He paused for a second, as if he was trying to recall something. Young boy a few years ago ran through the cornfield chasing after a piglet that got loose. One of those sharp leaves dragged across his throat. My brother took his finger and drew a line across his neck while making noise. It cut through his neck so deep that his head nearly fell off. My eyes widened, and blood shot out of the stump of his neck. They say it shot 10 feet into the air. He was dead before he hit the ground. I swallowed hard, and I watched my brother walk away. Had I seen the smirk on my brother's face, I would have known the story was nothing but a big lie, but I did not. For over a year, I feared walking through a cornfield. Hot summer sun beats down on the land in Iowa. The corn loves it, and the faster it causes the corn to grow. It was as if you could see it grow. Overnight, it would seem to be a foot taller. At the county fair, farmers would bring in their tallest corn. This was a time when corn was not cloned, resulting in every stalk growing the same height as every other in the field. The ears of the corn hung at different heights from each other, unlike today where every ear is in the identical same spot on the stalk. Fields of corn were as different as the people that farmed it. I was amazed at how tall some of the corn stalks were. I was looking up at the tallest one at the crop insurance booth. It towered over me. A tag on it had the farmer's name and 14 feet 7 inches. I was looking up at the tassel on the top of the cornstalk when a farmer and his 2 sons came into the agricultural building carrying a stalk of corn. The farmer was holding the roots at the far end, and the oldest son was carrying the tassel portion of the stalk. In the middle was the youngest son supporting the center of the stalk. "Excuse me, young man," said the farmer politely. "I would like to enter this stalk of corn into the tallest corn contest." A sign at the booth stated a $20 prize would be awarded to the winner of the contest. $20 in 1960 would be like $200 today. The farmer and his sons gently laid the stalk onto the cement floor. They took a position to protect the stalk from somebody walking over it. The crop insurance man pulled out a 20-foot tape measure. "You're going to need something longer than that, little measure. Here, use my 50-footer. One insurance man held the tape at the point that the corn came out of the ground. The other insurance man began to walk towards the tassels. He began to call out the distance. 15 feet, 20 feet, 25 feet, 27 feet 4 inches. There was an audible gasp as the final height was called out. "This ain't going to fit in here. The ceiling is only 20 foot tall." The men couldn't decide how to display the cornstalk. Then a man in the crowd called out, "Give the fire department a call and have them bring down their tallest ladder." In the end, the stalk reached up to the ceiling and bent to one side as it was placed between the rafters. A tag proudly announced the farmer's name and 27 feet 4 inches. At the end of the fair, the crop insurance man and the farmer stood in front of the booth with the corn plant behind them. The photographer for the Times Plain Dealer had to bend down low and point upward to get some of the corn plant in the picture. The following year, the farmer brought in a 28-foot 8-inch cornstalk, which brought on accusations that it was fake. Envious farmers claimed that it was several corn plants glued together. After an inch-by-inch examination, it was found to be real. The following year, the crop insurance booth no longer held the tallest corn plant contest. When I wrote this story, I thought a corn stalk that was 28 feet, 8 inches would be too unbelievable, too far-fetched. That was until I went online and searched for the tallest corn stalk. In 2020, a New York farmer grew a corn stalk that measured 45 feet tall. Then in the following year, he grew a corn stalk that was 48 feet and 2 inches tall. He built a special greenhouse that was tall and narrow. Through gene manipulation, controlled light, water, and fertilizer, he was able to grow the monster plant. I hope you've enjoyed this short tale of growing up in Iowa. If you would like more of my somewhat plausible tall tales, I have 2 books on Amazon: Cow Tales, Plausible Farm Stories, and Pig Tales, Plausible Farm Stories. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed.